It was the National Enquirer. And there was this picture of me up in the corner that probably the worst picture I've ever taken in my life. But come to find out, they sold their story to the National Enquirer for $600.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. Welcome to episode 199, and today I am speaking with Shirley. Hi, Shirley.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to see your face in person again.
Thank you.
I saw you at the summit, at the Untangling Our Roots Summit. I have to tell you, I heard you speak. I've heard about your story before from Don Anderson, but you were one of the speakers one morning at the Untangling Our Roots Summit, and I was incredibly moved by your story. I got very emotional listening to you, Shirley. Thank you so much for sharing your story at the summit.
You're welcome. So I want to thank everyone for this opportunity, especially Lily for having me here today. This may be a little emotional for me. However, it gets easier and easier each time I tell my story. I know that God has had a plan for me, and it's my destiny to share my story with others so that my hard experiences and the things I've endured may help others with similar trauma. On April 7th, 2001, 23 years ago, my life was flipped upside down. Everything, and I mean everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. I wasn't who I was supposed to be. My father was dying, and he never had thought I was his child. The first time he looked at me in the bassinet, he thought, she's not my child. She has a head of dark hair, dark eyes, olive skin. My wife had an affair. I was that bastard child. The whole family dynamics changed when I was brought home from the hospital. Gone was a loving family. Instead, it was a cold place with a constant undercurrent present. It wasn't spoken about because in 1958 and 60s, you didn't speak about things like these. And I had been called the milkman's daughter, the mailman's daughter. And then there was a crude one that my paternal grandmother had written in the letter that my mom that raised me made me read. I was in junior high and I got home from school and she was opening the mail and she said, "Shirl, come here. I want you to read this." And I'm like, "What?" And it was on yellow legal paper. And she was pointing at this one sentence. And my grandmother had called me the N in the woodpile. So when he was dying, he wanted this DNA test done. And I was so excited because I thought, finally, I am going to know who am I? Because I most certainly didn't fit in with a family of white giants. My brothers were 6'6". The girls were 5'8", 5'7", 5'9". There were 8 of us. And all the siblings looked alike. And then there was me. And I'm 5'4". Olive skin, dark hair, everything. And I just stuck out like a sore thumb. That's what one of my coworkers said to me. "Well, you just say Morgan, 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 and then you, and then Morgan. You just didn't fit in." So I received the test results, and they were 0.00% chance he could be my father. I couldn't even open the envelope. I had to have my boyfriend, Scott, who I'm now married to, open it for me. I couldn't do it. I mean, and it's still so emotional even after 23 years. And I thought my mom had always made statements to me without explanation. Like one time she said to me, she had been gone out of town and she said, did your dad tell you he wasn't your dad? And I said, no, why? And she goes, good, it isn't true. And she walked out of the room and shut the door. So I thought, now you're going to tell me the truth. For once in my life, you cannot walk out. I have a piece of paper. And I went to her house and she was sitting in her chair reading a book. And she stood up and she looked at me and I said, I have the test results. And she read them and she looked at me and she said, well, if he's not your father, I'm not your mother and I'll take a test to prove it. That was all she said to me. And I left and I begged her not to tell anyone before I left. And I knew she would tell the sisters. And sure enough, when I got to Scott's house, my phone rang and it was one of my sisters calling. And we weren't very close. And she just said, oh, I don't believe it's true. You need to have another test done. And I'm like, I know it's true. We did it I had 2 jobs then, and I worked for a laboratory testing company, and we did the DNA test done. And in 2001, you had to go through LabCorp and pictures and signatures. Everything had to be legal. So I knew it was true. I had never been able to deal with my emotions because they weren't valid. So God gave me this gift to suppress all my feelings because I couldn't handle them. Mm. So I didn't know what to do. I mean, all I could do was concentrate on something else. Mm-hmm. So I became a private detective. And I went to our local library because 2001, the internet was in its infancy, and I don't even know if Google was around. And went to the library and went through the microfiche and went to the day I was born. And there was only one baby born that day and one woman. And then I thought about it and I thought, wait a minute. I remember the stories the older siblings would tell me. They would laugh and say, oh, Shirley, you were born in the hallway. So the story goes that the mother that raised me, Jean, was in the delivery room ready to deliver, and they had to pull her out of the hallway because there was another woman that was having problems, and they took her into the delivery room. And so I knew there was another woman, and I knew there was another baby. And this is a really small town in northeastern Wyoming, and I still live here. There were 31 beds in the hospital. So, it was small. And then after that, I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to find out that way. And I had worked for doctors before. So I thought, I'm going to have Jean, the mother that raised me, sign a medical release so that I can have her records opened and then go from there. So she did that. And we had to go to Cheyenne to the state Wyoming archives and open the records. So I got her medical records, and it was like about 11 pages. And the clerk was really nice, and she said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I explained my story. And she said, well, in 1958, patient records were identified by numbers, and this file number was 4734. So you need to petition the Wyoming State Archives to open 433 and 435. So I got an attorney. Actually, the mother that raised me and I got an attorney. And we petitioned the judge to open the records. And it took him 5 months from when the records were delivered to his office to tell me and give me the information of my birth mother. I mean, I'm sure all of you people know how frustrating it is dealing with the judicial system. But I thought that's the legal way and that's the way I'm going to do it. However, the family I was raised with wanted to tell the world about this, and I was ashamed. I had never felt worthy of love, worthy of anything. I know everybody has these feelings. Most everybody I talked to at the summit had the same feelings. Mm-hmm. You just don't feel worthy of anything.
Talk to me a little bit more about you and your mother at this stage, because it sounds like there was distance between you. What was this like? How did you feel, you and your mother going through this?
Well, for about 20 years, my mother and I had been close. And then the older I got, it seemed to be the farther apart we got, especially she was very close to my sisters, but not so much to me later on. So the funny thing is that she loved my kids and she was very close to my kids, and my grandkids just loved her. So I saw her all the time because every Sunday after church, the kids and I went to visit her. But we really didn't talk about what was going on because in the beginning, she was all for me finding my birth mother, and she told me, but I don't want to find our daughter. I don't want to find my daughter. She only needs the health records. And I said, you don't want to find your daughter? And she said, no, but I want you to find your birth mother. So then all of a sudden I get a call from my attorney and he goes, what is going on? Your sister's up at the hospital throwing a fit, demanding medical records. And I'm like, I have no idea. My mom said she did not want to know her daughter's name. So I called her and she said, well, I've been talking to Hilda and she thinks she wants to find our daughter and our sister, and she's going to do whatever it takes. And we are going to do it a different way. So we don't want any part of your petition. And I said, okay. And then in the next breath, she asked the attorney, when do we get the names and the records? And he looked at her and he said, you don't. Your name's off the case. You do not get any information. Which I thought, oh, good, that's going to save me, because I just didn't want to be all splashed all over the media. And that's what happened. My mother, Jean, that raised me, took her DNA test because she told me she was going to prove she wasn't my mother. And she called me at work one day and said, oh, Shirley, I got the test results and I'm not your mom. And I said, oh, okay. And that was about it. And then we had a petition going with the judge to open our medical records. And she had changed her mind at that point and said she only wanted to have her daughter to have her information. And I said, okay. And so then her name was removed from the petition. And she told me that her daughter and her were going to find her daughter, her bio daughter, their own way. And they didn't need the court case to do it. And I thought that was kind of a good thing. I thought, well, maybe then it won't be in the media. So then in the 5 months we had to wait, it was really hard for my children because they were so close to my parents that raised me that they felt so torn because they loved their grandparents. And we went every Sunday to visit them, always. And then they saw me, but they didn't see all I went through because I didn't tell them everything that happened because they had such a close bond. I didn't want to break that bond because when they were born, I made a vow to them that they would never feel unloved. They would never live like I did. They would always know I loved them and that they were very important to me. So they didn't know a lot about what was going on. And then finally I received that call from my attorney. And he said, I have your birth mother's, just her admission sheet. Do you want me to tell you over the phone? And I said, no, I can't. I can't do it over the phone. I said, I'll have Scott come and pick it up. So I had him pick it up and he came, we met at my house and he opened it and I said, well, what information's in there? And he said, your mother's last name is Munoz. And I could not even pronounce it correctly because I had never heard Munoz. And your grandmother's name is Baez. And I thought, well, Baez, Joan Baez. And everybody had always asked me, what nationality are you? And I would say, I had always been told from a young age that I had been French Canadian. Supposedly a paternal great grandmother was French Canadian. And that was why I was dark. And he just gave me a funny look and he's like, you don't know what nationality you are? And I'm like, no, do you? And he's like, yeah, I do. And I'm like, I was kind of hurt. And I'm like, what? And he goes, you're Mexican. Well, I knew nothing about Mexican heritage or traditions. And I was a Mexican. And I felt like all of that had been ripped away from me for 43 years. I was living as a white person, and I couldn't even say my last name. And then we had to we got the rest of the medical records. But what was so sad was my birth mother's medical records were 4 pages long. And the mother that raised me, hers were 11 pages long. Everything was charted. She was only in the hospital for 3 days, and my birth mother was in the hospital for 7 days. Her chart it was left, so many parts of it were not even in there. And then I found my birth mother. The first person I actually spoke to was the one that I was switched with. And I was like so excited because I thought, oh my gosh, this is a person I can talk to and she's going to understand how I feel, because she's the only person that can understand it. I mean, counselors and therapists couldn't help me. I had been in therapy for years trying to deal with abandonment issues and self-esteem and self-worth, everything. And I was so excited because I thought, now, she's just going to be able to help me with everything.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talked to her, I was so afraid. I'd pick up the phone and hang it up and pick it up and hang it up. And so we talked, and she changed her voice quite frequently. Sometimes she was really animated, and sometimes she was just kind of normal. But we talked about, because I wanted to know about my family, and she made it perfectly clear to me. She said, oh, my mom is poly, and she found out, but she doesn't believe that it could really happen because my biological father was white. So she never thought that she always thought her daughter was her daughter. Never had any doubts in her mind, and she had a hard time even believing that test. But then she talked to me like about I had a half sister and 2 half brothers and a very mean stepfather, which was true. Both of us, ironically, came from dysfunctional families. And we talked on, and she said, I'm coming to Gillette. And I said, oh, good. When are you coming? And she said, well, I'm not really sure. And she said, I'm going to go visit my mom in Utah. And I thought, wow, maybe I could go with her. So I said, well, could I meet you there and we could meet your mom, our mom?
Yeah.
And she said, I don't know when I'm coming yet, because I was so worried that if she met some of the sisters before she met me, then she wouldn't talk to me. I had always felt I had been undermined in my life. Like the sisters would come to town, and then my husband would say, so Cheryl, what are you doing home? The girls are at lunch because they were golfing. And I said, well, I didn't get called. And then they would say, oh, well, I thought so-and-so was supposed to call you. And I thought so-and-so was supposed to call you. And that's how it happened when they would come to town. And it always just devastated me to be excluded.
They really did leave you out.
Yes.
That is so odd.
But, I guess when you think about it, I changed everything. I didn't look like them. I didn't fit in.
How many siblings were you raised with in your raising family?
There were 4 boys and 4 girls. So there were 8 children. Oh. Yes, a large family.
And you look different than all of them.
Oh, yes. Very different. I mean, it was, yeah. Because I remember one time my sister took me to where she worked, and they looked at me and said, oh, same mother, not same father. Oh. Because they were all tall and very fair skinned and blonde hair. Some of them had dark hair, but they all had fair skin, big frames, blue or green eyes. And I remember the older siblings coming home from school and saying, my science teacher said 2 blue-eyed parents can't have a brown-eyed child, but we told them they can because our sister Shirley has brown eyes. Like 3 of my siblings came home from science class when they were older and said that to me.
Yeah, because that was something you would do in science class. You would do the Punnett square and figure out the genes and the traits.
But then I don't understand, why didn't they act on that? I remember we had encyclopedias for studying, and if a science teacher said that, why didn't they investigate that further? If especially given the fact that he never thought I was his daughter.
And I suppose when you were a tiny baby in the hospital, like 1 day old, 2 day old, they couldn't tell they had accidentally switched the babies?
No, because I asked the mother that raised me, I said, because they were in twilight sleep when they delivered. So they did not see the babies right after they were born, only a couple hours after, when they brought them in to be fed. So I said, when you were presented with your baby, what did she look like? And she said she had a head of dark hair, olive skin, and brown eyes. It was you. So there was just crazy how there were only 2 babies born that day, 20 minutes apart, one to a unwed Mexican woman and one to a white woman. So I don't know how that could happen.
How could they screw that up?
Well, I don't know. It's just, it's crazy. So I did meet, after our phone conversation with this is when I was switched with that, we only had one phone conversation. That was it. She was very protective of her mother and her mother, Polly, that raised her. So the first person I met in my biological family was my Aunt Mary. And she's just amazing. I love her. We bonded like instantly. It was like we were instantly family. We went to visit actually my half siblings too. My birth mother didn't live there at the time. And so I went into this grocery store, and she had a pharmacy in there, and I was walking down the aisle kind of looking for it. And I see this little Mexican woman, and she's walking really, really fast like I do. And she came up to me and she hugged me and she said, "You look just like your mother." I had waited 43 years to hear someone say, "You look like," and it just felt so good. And a couple weeks later, I met my birth mother, and she came, of course, with my Aunt Mary. And I was so nervous. I was walking around in my house and making sure everything was cleaned up and that I looked nice, because I thought I need to look nice so she accepts me, because I want her to love me. And when they pulled up, I went outside and they got out of the car, and Holly walked up to me. She was my birth mother, and she kind of hugged me and said, "Well, I'm glad you found me. I'm your mom, Polly." And there wasn't like that instant connection, and she was very guarded with me. Her husband did not like me. And I would go and visit her, and he would speak Spanish because he knew I couldn't speak Spanish, and then I would leave.
Oh, gosh.
So we never, ever had, in the 10 years, we never had a relationship. I learned to cook Mexican food from my Aunt Mary, and she never measured anything. So I would go and sit in her kitchen, and she would make tortillas, and she would just grab flour out. And then I grab my cup and measure it all out, because I'm an accountant and I had to have it all written out perfectly. And that's what I did to learn how to cook Mexican food. And my Aunt Mary introduced me to all of my cousins, and it was just, I was not accepted I feel like I was rejected by both mothers, but embraced by all sides of my extended family.
Really?
All my cousins, yes, like my cousins that I was raised with, they're like, "That has changed nothing." And the new cousins embrace me. And like, I was just at my cousin's house this last weekend, and they're like, "It's just like you've always been here. You just fit in." So that part was wonderful.
So you have this acceptance and this connection with your aunt, cousins, and you're raising cousins, it sounds like, as well.
Yes.
But the mothers, your biological mother, she never wanted to create that bond with you, to open up to you?
I talked to one of my cousins, and she said, "I think that your mother's way of showing love was by physical care, and you didn't need that physical care. You were, you were single and you had a really good job and you had your own house and you were raising your sons, and you just didn't have that physical need of her. I mean, she was even a caregiver. Like, she took care of elderly people at night. But yeah, and part of it, I think, was my Aunt Mary told me that when they were coming to see me, that Polly said to her that the one that I was switched with, Debbie, had called Polly and said, "I'm worried that if you meet Shirley, you will love her more than you would love me."
Oh.
So
there's enough love for everyone.
yes, I know. And I think if I found out, I would just embrace another one as a daughter, an extra daughter, you don't have to cast one aside.
Right. So your biological mother, Polly, it's almost like she was trying to take care of Debbie, the daughter she raised, her needs, trying to keep her loyalty to you to the point where she didn't want to create that loving bond with you.
I just don't know if she was capable.
Yeah.
Because she was the oldest daughter, and she cared for her younger siblings also. So she'd always been like a caregiver. But I don't know if she was really capable of emotional love. And, it really hurt until I wrote my book, and I was interviewing my cousin, and she's like, "I just don't think she just was not like that. That emotional part of love was just not there." So that helped me and made me feel better.
What is the name of your book? Because this was going around at the summit, but I want to get this on the podcast.
The Little Dark One, A True Story of Switched at Birth. I
will link your book. It can be found on Amazon. The Little Dark One. That's you.
Yes. That's what I can remember when I was little, my aunts and uncles would come to visit, and they'd always take me with them because we had such a large family. And I would always get to go ride with them and visit other people. And he'd always call me the Little Dark One. And even like after I was switched at birth, he had called the mom that raised me and said, "How is the Little Dark One doing?" And it wasn't in a derogatory way. It was just in more of an obvious way.
Yeah.
I never felt it was a bad thing to say.
So I understand now the other woman that was switched at birth, Debbie, and her connection with your biological mother, her raising mother. So talk to me about when Debbie and Jean met. How did they bond? Did they not bond? Was she treated the same as you were treated by your biological mother?
They had this huge party for her, and it was like, I told Scott, they sent me an invitation, and I told Scott, I said, "I can't go." And my birth mother called and asked me she said, "They're having a party for Debbie for a welcome to the family party." And I said, "I'm not going. I don't belong there." And she said, "No, you need to go." And I wanted so much to make a good impression on her. I went, and Scott went, and my sons went with us. And I walked in and I looked around, and there were like banners of our daughter's finally home, and welcome to the family, and balloons and some cousins. And I didn't speak to anyone. And I walked behind Scott. I said, "Just get somewhere." And so he was like running interference like a football player because he's a lot bigger than me. And I just walked behind him, and we found a little nook and stood in there. And my brother Bill, whom I'm really close to, that I was raised with, he talked to me for a little bit, and Scott and I kind of hid in the alcove, and I looked at him and I said, "I don't belong here. I want to leave." And as we were getting ready to leave, someone came up and said, "Oh, we need a picture of Shirley and Debbie together." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want that." And so Scott had to physically push me to get me to go there. And so we had our picture taken, wanted to hurry and get out of there. And Jean, the raising mother, said, your dad wants to say something to you. And I said, oh, no, because when I had taken the test results to him, he said, I knew you weren't my daughter from the day I brought you home from the hospital. I just took you in and raised you. Kind of like they had raised sheep when they were
Yeah.
younger. And he said, like if you have a black faced lamb and you need a mother, she'll just take in a bum lamb and raise it. That's what I did with you.
Oh my.
And I thought, I don't even want to talk to him. Why is he calling me in there? And I walked in there and he looks at me and he goes, oh, well, I just wanted you to know I still love you as a daughter. And I thought, yeah, right.
Words.
Yeah. And I mean, I walked out and I was ahead of Scott. I just had to get out of there and it was snowing outside and I just hurried outside and it was so hard. I mean, I thought, what a mistake I made going there.
This huge fanfare they have for
Oh,
Debbie.
they had like 3 parties like that.
Oh my.
And one of their invitations they sent me, I opened it up and it said, Dear Shirl, you and Scott and the kids are invited. We're having a birthday party, a combined birthday party for Dad and for Debbie. I showed Scott and he goes, what? And I said, it's my birthday too.
You guys were born on the same day.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so painful.
Yeah.
Oh, they're raising daughter and they're throwing a birthday party for your dad and Debbie. Oh, ouch.
Yeah. Yes. And then came the media. It was horrible. Scott came and brought me this big pile. Austin was sick in the hospital and I was there because I'd been taking care of him and I was exhausted too. And we had been asleep and Scott comes in with this big pile of newspapers and I'm kind of half asleep and I wake up and he sets them on the table and he goes, Cheryl, I'm sorry. I tried to buy all I could. He said, but they're everywhere. And I said, what? And it was the National Enquirer. And he opened it up and there was this picture of me up in the corner that it was an old black and white picture of me when I was probably a junior in high school and probably the worst picture I've ever taken in my life. And then all their pictures were all colored and everything. But come to find out, they sold their story to the National Enquirer for $600.
Your parents?
And Debbie.
Oh my goodness. That's the last thing you wanted.
I know. And I asked him, I said, would you please just keep this private? I'll find her. And they're like, no, we're going to do whatever it takes. And it was on, it was in the Oprah magazine. And she kept calling me. She was a freelance writer. And I'm like, no, I can't do it. I just can't do it. And she said, well, would one of your friends do it? And I'm like, probably my girlfriend would do it. And she was with me through everything. So she said, to me one time, people always, because she had a hair salon, she said people would always say, so, wow, we never thought she was one of them. I remember our parents talking about how that could not be his daughter. And so she knew the whole story. And so the freelance writer spoke with her and I did accounting for her. And one day I was in there picking up her accounting and she was on the phone and someone was just screaming at her and she was screaming back. And I'm like, I knew who it was. It was Vicky, a sister I was raised with, called her and told her how dare she speak to the Rosie magazine. She had no idea who they were, anything about their family, and she had no right to talk to them, and that she didn't understand. Cheryl was nothing but a spoiled, rotten brat, and she still is nothing but a spoiled, rotten brat, and you should never talk to the media again. But that's why I never talked to the media. Also, not only being ashamed and embarrassed, but I didn't want to be attacked.
While you're being splashed all over the media and your story's out, and you had just been through severe trauma, finding all this out and meeting everyone, what kind of support did you have at this time?
Well, I had been in counseling for quite some time in therapy because of all my problems with all the abandonment issues and all of that. But there really wasn't. I went to see the counselor I had seen, but they didn't know how to handle it then. I mean, this 23 years ago, they didn't even know about any of this, not like now. Like Scott was there to support me, but he didn't know what to do either. So I did the only thing I knew what to do, how to do, and that was just suppress it all and then smile and say everything was fine because I'd done that for a lifetime. So that's how I made it through.
Wow. You had no other choice.
Oh, and plus faith. Without God in my life, I know that I would have never survived, ever.
Mhm.
He was always there for me. My faith has even grown stronger through finally in writing my book. I thought I had healed. You know, I was like, even the professor said, well, have you healed? And I'm like, oh yeah, I've healed. And I began writing, and my editor said, I wrote it like you would do a PowerPoint. And this happened. I could tell you the day, what happened, and that kind of stuff. And they said, well, how did you feel? And I said, I didn't feel. And they're like, no, you did. And I'm like, no, I didn't. And they said, no, you had feelings. And I thought, oh, okay. So I wrote a few chapters, and then I went back and rewrote them, and I put in what I thought I should feel
Yep.
because I didn't know how I felt. And then I went into therapy, and it took 5 times because I would tell her, I could tell anybody my story, but it was just this happened and this happened and this happened. There was no emotion. And finally, after about 5 times of counseling, she said to me, she asked me something, and I just started crying. And she said, now is the time. Now is the time you need to let go. She said, God is here, and you have to take these bridges down and let go. And so I let go and let God because I don't think I would have survived had I not went into counseling.
When did you write your book and start going through counseling?
In 2021.
Ah, I am so glad you did this, Shirley. That's how I've started hearing about you the last year or so. And here you had to suppress this, what, for a couple decades? Probably.
No, like 60 years.
Oh, that's true. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Well, you writing this book and coming into therapy, I've now heard your story. I've heard you on podcasts. I've heard you're speaking now, you're sharing your story, your book. Did you find writing that book,
Cathartic.
yeah, part of your healing
Yes.
process?
Yes, I did. And I've done quite a few author talks and book signings, and people will say to me, isn't this really hard for you? And I say, no, actually, it's healing for me because I can look out at all the people that are sitting there, and, I can tell who I'm making a connection with. And they usually come up and talk to me later on. And when you make yourself vulnerable, people feel free to talk to you
Yes.
because they know you've endured something, trauma.
Yeah.
So they tell me things. And that helps heal me because my whole goal in writing the book was to help people. Because my son kept pushing me, Mom, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. And I'm like, I can't. I could hurt so many people. And he's like, no, you need to write a book. He goes, Mom, what if you help one person?
Yeah.
Isn't that worth it?
You helped me when I heard your story at the summit. I call this the community of nodding heads. And I was nodding along when I heard your story. It just felt like, yes, even though I wasn't switched at birth, I too felt this cold aloofness from both sides of the family. And that's something I really identified with parts of your story.
And I have been embraced by both sides of my families, but I sometimes still feel like I'm on a tightrope, and I have my raising family and my biological family, and then there's me in the middle, and I feel like imposter syndrome. Like I'm one person when I'm with one family, and I'm one person when I'm in another family, and sometimes I go away and think, was that really me? Because you know that imposter syndrome, how you feel.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what was so amazing about the summit was I didn't have to explain anything. I got, like you said, the nodding heads.
Yep.
Because unless you've endured all of this, you cannot possibly understand what we've endured.
If people wanted to reach out to you, Shirley, could they do that? And what would be the best way?
Yes, they could. They could reach me at my email address, which is SMUNOZNEWSON, author, AUTHOR, at gmail.com.
Shirley, thank you so much. I'm so glad you are starting to share more of your story in our community. You're the first NPE I've ever had that has been switched at birth. And thank you for writing your book. Thank you for being part of our community. And thank you for sharing your story today. These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.